Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of FlyOverThinkers. I'm Josh Corum, and with us, as always, is Eric Johnson.
How you doing, Josh? John,
Good.
good to see you.
And, of course, John Paulson.
Josh, Eric, it's great to see both of you and to share this time with you again and with everybody that's listening. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. We got our little glasses today. This is my cat mug. I love it because it's like, my little cat face mug. Anyway, so John, would you prefer John, or should we like Professor John, because you're tenured now? I feel like we should show respect to that.
Well, thank you. But since the tone of this podcast is respectful yet irreverent, we should probably just call me John. Is that calling professor sounds like the good old phrase of putting lipstick on a pig.
Wow.
Which all I'm saying is don't threaten me with a good time, but it probably doesn't fit in this particular context.
I mean, we are from Indiana, so I'm sure we've seen lipstick on a pig more times than we'd like to admit. But anyway, so today we are going to dive into just some fun topics. We're going to dive into insecurity, and this was Eric's idea. So I'm going to let him take it. So Eric, when you came up with this idea of insecurity, what exactly did you have in mind?
Well, it's something that I've always struggled with for as long as I can remember. And I kind of just wanted to kick it around with you guys and get some input and see, what kind of ways you guys deal with insecurity, or, what kind of coping mechanisms or things that you're insecure about. In the past, I've always tried to, figure out where my inner critic gets its information. It's always the part in your head that's, telling you that you're, not enough or not good enough or lacking in a certain area, or, and it could be some kind of, evolutionary force to drive you to get better. I don't know what to call that, but so it's something I've always struggled with. So I just kind of wanted to kick it around with you guys and see what you think.
Yeah, I think a lot of men experience this, right? A lot of men experience this idea of insecurity, whether it comes in different ways, right? For me, my biggest one is, John, you might relate to this too. If Eric, you might relate to this, is this idea of imposter syndrome, which we could do a whole episode on imposter syndrome. But it does speak to that idea of insecurity. It's one of those areas. Yeah, I think this is a great topic. I don't think enough men talk about their insecurities or how they cope with them, or things that they struggle with. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that comes to me is that, insecurity is a common shared human experience. So I think we all have it. And even though it is universal, it's going to have some specific characteristics and dynamics, depending upon our particular identity. So just for an example, is that we all have insecurity. Women, for an example, might have kind of particular types or patterns of insecurity. And I think that we as guys do as well. And that we just don't tend to spend as much time actually acknowledging or talking about those.
So what do you think of those patterns of insecurity?
I think that Eric nailed it sort of on the head, because I think that for guys in general, and this is just my assumption based off of some of my own experiences and my own struggles, is that I think that what it comes down to is dealing with this sense of not being strong or capable enough, not being quote unquote enough of a guy. I mean, I often have joked about this sort of for years, that especially, and probably out of the three of us, that are on here, I always joke that I flunk the man test because I can't build it, I can't fix it, and I can't hunt it. It's like, and so I just completely fail in those categories. And I use those as, of course, representative, stereotypical, kind of male activities or areas of competency. But I think that because of the way that we as guys, and I actually think that some of this goes back to not just cultural, but a little bit biological. Like, I know as soon as somebody says that, they start to get into dangerous waters. So I'm not talking about a sense of determinism, but I always call it kind of almost a sense of biological default. It's like that script is in there. It doesn't mean we have to act it out. But I think that when you look at, like, I love watching shows about primates and great apes, and you look at the way that we as great apes organize ourselves, is that there is this dominant structure, this hierarchical structure where people are vying for dominance, access to resources. And I think that that plays out among us as not only human beings, but especially us as men. And that part of the way that it sort of plays out is in our sort of capabilities as guys linked to traditional sort of roles of providing and protecting. So I think that, at least for guys, we have to look at that sort of, in unique way it comes about for us. And so then if we look at just those two dynamics of providing and protecting, now those can mean lots of different things. And we can start very minimalist as far as, kind of basics of providing and protecting, but you could also then look at many ways that in our modern context, in our modern society, that still ties into the sense of providing or protecting. And so one, I think since we're geared towards that we're automatically sort of set up to almost sort of like in our mind to go, am I living up to those? And then there's a little voice that says, I'm not living up to those. And the function of that is because then that motivates us to try to work harder. But then also I think that just because of our guy culture, and I'm not saying this is always bad. In fact, it's not. It's something I love about being a guy. But I think that we don't always help with that because we're often taking jabs at one another. And a lot of times that's playful and it's fun and it's loving. So again, I wouldn't give that up, but I think sometimes it can end up only making all that worse. So those are my thoughts. I think it kind of comes down to it because, so for example, I get real quick and I'll be quiet. I've always struggled with that because I don't have a lot of typical guy interest or capacities, like things that I'm able to do, or good at. I mean, Eric could probably basically build a whole house and I don't even know what particular tools are called. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. And I've always sort of felt that, so that, especially with some of that ribbing and that criticism where guys try to show they're a little bit better or more than you, it's like when people would be like, you don't know what that tool is, all this. And, again, about the only thing I would say that I can't build it, I can't fix it, and I can't hunt it, but I can kill you. So it's like, it's one of those deals where it's like, make fun of me not knowing what that tool is. I will choke you unconscious. It's like my only go-to capacity as a guy is I can't build it, I can't fix it, but I can kill you. So it's like, that's that. Of course, I say that jokingly, but that's always something that at least I've kind of struggled with, is that sense of not being a capable enough of a guy. Yeah. But I don't know, Josh. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. I don't know. You threw a lot out there, so I was writing some of this stuff down. But I think let's address this first thing, because you, as a sociologist, I'm like, so many things. Because you brought in culture, but then you also brought in biology. So, like, let's look at this idea of this pecking order, right? Which is basically what you're throwing out there. I always bristle at this, and you're right. If you look at our primate relatives, what do we have? We have the chimpanzee and we have the bonobo, right? Those are our closest relatives. The chimpanzee are homicidal maniacs. They're violent. They are hierarchical, but they are also very, very violent. Bonobos, less so. Bonobos tend to be more relaxed. They use sex as like this means of like conflict resolution. They use sex and pleasure in this weird kind of interesting, not weird way, but this interesting way. Whereas chimpanzees are basically, they'll do infanticide and rape and all that stuff. If you want to call it. So which one are we? And how does that play out in this idea of this notion of human pecking order? Or do we have alphas? Like these guys, they assume they're alphas because they're like last show, these high value males, self-proclaimed high value males. Sure, you make a lot of money, but just like you said, John, can you kill me with your bare hands? Probably not. I can. I'm just like you, John. This is a facade. Like I don't build shit. I pay people to build stuff or fix stuff in my house. I can kind of cook. I suck at grilling. Can I lift heavy shit? Absolutely. Will I help you move? Absolutely not. But can I choke you out? Sure. Can I throw you across the room? Absolutely. Like so, but also highly educated. Like so, how does that pan out with this idea of alpha maleism or this pecking order? Like, are those things valuable? It's really weird to think about humans having a pecking order because there's such a variety of humans, and culture plays such a huge role in what that even means. I don't know, Eric. What do you think, Eric?
Well, I think there's, depending on the situation and there's different ways of measuring and different standards that people measure themselves according to. So many different situations, I think can bring about insecurity, and it doesn't even have to be something that you dwell on all the time. Like, John's talking about, not being man enough, some guys fret over the fact that they can't back up a trailer. They're like, well, I don't have any, so they just avoid that, their whole life. They're like, well, if I just don't have to mess with that, then maybe that'll never come up,
But coming from like a redneck river family, I can't do that. I'm like worthless when, I feel like in their eyes. But I feel like that, speaking of what you're saying, like in different contexts, that feeling of insecurity changes. Like, no, I can't back up a trailer, but can I write like a scientific journal article? Absolutely. Does that make me manly? Probably not. But you're right. It's different contexts. It's different strengths and weaknesses. But what context kind of pushes through, right? Like in your main life.
Well, what I've kind of geared my focus toward is when I've got incoming insecurity, what do I do with that information? What kind of output am I going to turn that into? Like it's, an engine, you feed it gasoline and it, produces energy. I think an efficient machine can run on anything you feed it. So if you're going to have insecurity, why not find a way to flip it around and make it work in your favor, if that makes sense? Kind of make it a driving force. You've encountered this insecurity in this situation. Okay, now what are you going to do with that information? It's what can I do to grow past that if this situation comes up again? I don't know. What do you think, John?
Well, I think great point. So great. So a couple things I want to mention real quick, especially kind of Josh off of like what you said, is that, so for an example, say, which one are we? The violent chimps or the caring bonobos? And I would say that we're both. We have both capacities built into us, and then different cultural scripts just, kind of help determine how those kind of get played out. And yeah, I think that I'm not suggesting that there's like a particular alpha male, because even within chimp communities, even within other primate communities, who tends to have the most say and influence changes a lot over time. And it changes because of political alliances. It changes because of expectations of the group. So I don't think it's a static thing. but kind of like, but I think we're kind of both. And one thing I want to say is that I'm not being critical of skill sets and interest sets that we're identifying as quote unquote typically male, because in fact I'm very impressed and I'm very envious of when people have some of those skills, Josh, like you said, like the ability to grow well, or the ability to fix things. I mean, I think that those are important skills. And I think the biggest part of it comes in, and I'll kind of go into kind of what you're saying, Eric. So it's not about, oh, if I can't do these things, I'm bad. But one of the reasons we think that is because we're putting the expectation on there of that societal script, that almost an if then. Well, if you can't do this, then that says such and such about you as a person. And then other people do it. So I'm appreciative when other people can do those things. But whenever they historically have belittled and made fun of me and rejected me because I cannot, that's where the hurt comes from. It's not even so much the not being able to do it. It's then the way that turns into interpersonal treatment. And so for me, something I've gotten wonderfully better with over time, just with age and experience, but also with relationships. So like you said, kind of what do I do when that comes in, is that, so one thing that I found that's helpful is to try to begin to take that stuff and to put it into a broader perspective, almost like if you were dropping dye in a water. In a cup, it's going to look like it's all the water, but you dump that into a swimming pool and it's only going to be a small thing. So, this idea of, oh my gosh, I can't fix things. Yeah, but you know what? That doesn't necessarily mean that it says anything about me as a person. And like Josh said, there's lots of other stuff I can do well. I can throw people, I can write a scientific paper, And so anymore, there's a sense of when I notice these insecurities come up, it's being able to remind myself, these don't necessarily define me or say anything about who I am as a person, as a being. And I can put them in the context of other skills and other relationships, if that makes any sense.
I think there's a lot of, so one of my favorite authors, and whenever I teach a sexuality class, we read him. His name's Steve Seidman, or Stephen Seidman, and he wrote The Social Construction of Sexuality. And one of the things he talks about in there is the regulation of masculinity, particularly when you're younger. We as men, and when we're younger, have a bad habit of trying to regulate what it is to be masculine and what it is to be male. And a lot of times in earlier forms, it's lessened. I feel like it's lessened a lot today, but a lot of it has to do with this weird, like, sexuality gender thing. Like, to be a man means you're straight, but also to be straight means you have these very masculine behaviors. And we're going to regulate both of those by the people around you are going to try to regulate those the best they can, like ridiculing you if you don't follow suit in certain gender behaviors. Then they're going to assume something about your sexuality. And sexuality tends to be this thing that, governs men's lives a lot, whether we know it, whether we think about it or not. Like, our sexuality and our gender construct, social construct, tend to regulate our behavior quite a bit around this notion of masculinity. And a lot of this idea of insecurity is like, all right, well, am I masculine enough? Are people going to question my sexuality? Does it matter if they question my sexuality? Like, do I give a shit? Like, and then how does that focus, go back on my sense of who I am as far as my being a man, this and that. So I think this kind of plays in there with this notion of this, or like as a foundational background of this insecurity, like kind of, because it gets started when you're young. It started at middle school. Everybody calls each other names, just like you were talking about, John. Like, you rib each other, you make sure you're kind of poke and jab and make sure you're following in line with these ideas of masculinity to ensure that you're not a weirdo or whatever. And it's totally fine to be a weirdo, right? Especially though it's more fun to be a weirdo. But we kind of grow up in these really rigid definitions, and then whenever we get older, it takes a lot of work for us to pull ourselves out of these rigid gender masculine definitions to kind of make who we are. I don't know. Or it could be full of shit.
It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Ah,
True story.
this guy's got jokes. I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of my insecurity growing up, started around, being accepted and like, trying to find a seat at the lunch table, like who do you sit with, like that's kind of how you spend the rest of your life, just trying to fit in, that's the world's just a giant lunch table and you're like, where do I sit? But yeah, there's, when I was a kid, I'll tell you a crazy story about where some of my insecurity came from. Like I've got really poor eyesight. Like my glasses growing up looked like Coke bottles, like they were huge. They didn't have the thin and light lenses that you can get now because the technology in the 80s and 90s weren't geared toward that yet. So my poor eyesight afforded me giant, thick glasses. So I was always insecure about my looks. That was something that I couldn't do anything about. It wasn't something that I could work on. It was just something that I had to accept. Yeah, I had to deal with certain types of rejection because of that. I mean, it's like I said, it's something I couldn't change, but I was poor growing up, so they called me generic Eric because I didn't have all the fancy things that everyone else had, and on top of that, I'm got these Coke bottle glasses, and so I found myself feeling inadequate in many different ways, and they were situations that I couldn't do anything about at the time.
So you would say some of your insecurity is wrapped up in financial insecurity, like money being able to fit in that way?
Um, as a child, yeah. I mean, it was, and like I said, with the feeling unattractive, because of my giant glasses, like I got called a nerd a whole lot, and now that's a cool thing. It's cool to be a nerd these days, but like we're talking about strengths and such. Like John, I couldn't compete with your comic knowledge. Like you know a lot about comics. I love the Marvel universe and everything that they're. I say everything. Most of the stuff they're putting out now, but I can build a house, but a lot of these comic things, more of the facts. So in that arena, like that's something that I would feel inadequate about. Like, when you're talking about the new Kung Fu character, and I'm like, I don't know a lot about that guy. So
Yeah, and that's a great point, Eric. And for me, that's something that again that I have sort of found helpful. And this is so an example of this that I was thinking about when you were talking, Eric, is again, I think over time is that as people, hopefully we get better at one, acknowledging the things we're good at. Because if we're too self-critical, we'll just say, oh, I don't have anything I'm good at. I don't have any strengths. And that's bullshit. We all have them. And they don't have to be the same ones. Like my brother Adam and I have talked about this. I'm incredibly impressed with his skill sets and what he does. And then he expresses incredibly impressed with what I do. And it's genuine. And we're both also able to acknowledge things that we're not so good at, and that's okay, because increasingly you start to get to a point where you realize that just because you're not good at something or not knowledgeable about something, that doesn't mean that you're inferior. Like maybe earlier in life I felt that way, that if I don't know this or I'm not able to do this, I can't live up. And two things I realized that helped me with that is one, developing some areas where I could take pride in my competence and success. So some of that was with school, some of that was with martial arts. And so even though I wasn't good at other stuff, it became increasingly okay for me to not be good at certain things because I was good at others. And then it was also finding relationships with people that, and especially now, again, for me, just because of who I am, is, a couple people that I saw as, because I've always had this sense of a lack of confidence, a sense of not, feeling capable or secure. And I met people that were great role models of that confidence, but then who were also highly skilled at certain areas, but who also were not like the rejecting people of, oh my gosh, if you don't know this or you're not good enough, I don't have time for you. It was kind of a sense of, hey, you know what? I take you for who you are. I value you for who you are. We're friends, so there wasn't that sense of criticism. And so one thing I think is, so find things you're good at, because those buffer against the other things, and then find relationships where you have people that help you to feel successful, valued, and accepted. So as a quick example, so, me being incredibly shy and insecure, whenever I was in college and first going out. So one of my great examples of this is a really wonderful, kind of friend of mine, one of my best friends, Jason. And he's incredibly confident, incredibly capable guy. I'm like the complete opposite. Here I am. I'm like insecure, type deal. We were out because that's what you do when you're in college and you're 21. And we were at a bar where like people were dancing. And I'm just back on the corner. And he's like, what are you doing? Get out there with this. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know, because I'm worried about not looking good, what people are going to think. And then I just remember this story, because Jason said, listen, look out there. No one out there is Patrick Swayze. He said, and you know what? He goes, none of these fucking people tomorrow are even going to remember who you are. They're not going to be talking about you. They're not going to be thinking about you. So get your ass off the wall and get out there with us. And I did. And it was one of those moments. I mean, there's been lots of those like that, but it's sort of having some people in my life that were more like encouraging me, like a kind of affirming of me, instead of those people that would pick on you or make you feel kind of belittled. It was more of these people of, hey, I look up to them, and you know what? They accept me for who I am, and they want me to be part of, this tribe. And so that was just kind of like so wonderfully, I think, in addition to getting some things that over time I got good at, I also had relationships with people where, guess what? Hey, they don't put some type of condition of worth on me that I have to know this or be capable of this. Otherwise, they'll reject me. It's kind of a sense of, hey, you know what? You're a weird fucker. And I love that. And so I'm not going to expect you to be any different than you are. So that's been helpful to me as well.
Yeah. I like that idea of finding a few things that you're good at, because you're right. You're not going to be, I think for anybody listening to this, if you're a dude or even if you're a woman, whatever, like you're not going to be good at everything. You're not going to be good at the things, every single thing that makes you a man, makes you a woman. Like you're going to have to pick a couple things to be good at. And that's going to be your, like, what you just kind of got to house yourself in, because very few people are good at everything of what it means to be whatever. I just don't think there's those people. And I think they're always going to have those insecurities about the things they're not good at or the things that just don't connect. Because like you, I can, I can't build anything. I try. Like I'm the son of a carpenter, and my brothers are both, handy capable. Is that not handy? That's not what I mean. They're handymen. Actually, my younger brother runs a handyman business, and my older brother is, he's a manual labor guy. Like they know how to do stuff. I don't know how to do that. So, but I also know that, just like you're saying, child, like I have my strengths and other things, and I think it's important to hone those the best you can. And if someone makes you feel, if there's one of these people that makes you feel like you're not good enough or something like that, like fuck them. You're good at what you're good at. Like you don't need to prove yourself in any way. I will say that it's a fear, especially being an instructor, but also just being out in public. One of my big fears these days is being recorded. It's an insecurity. I feel like it creates all these new insecurities for me of not looking weird in public, not breaking a norm in public. Even though you don't really give a shit, but sometimes I do. But like I do, like it's an irrational fear that creates a weird insecurity for me of not wanting to be a viral video. Like, oh my god, look at this guy! You know, he fell down. Like, fucking, who gives a shit? I fell down. Like, that's what gravity is. It sucks. You know, everybody falls. Fuck off. You know, or something like that. Like, I feel like the age we live in today is creating these weird new insecurities for people. Because, like you were saying, you know, you go out on the dance floor. You're right. No one's going to remember you unless they fucking recorded you dancing weird and then they put it on YouTube. Like, it's like no one has a sense of just be here right now, put your fucking phone away and enjoy the dance. No, you got to record it and create all this weirdness. You know, you got to put it on your fucking Instagram and be like, "Whoa, look at this! Ha, ha, ha. I'm viral now." You know, I got 100,000 followers because I videotaped this guy trying to have fun on the dance floor. And so I feel like in the back of my mind, I'm always like, "All right, well, is someone going to record this? Is this weird?" Like, it drives me crazy.
And that's because Josh said last time that he spends way too much time on TikTok. So apparently this is part of it. But
that's true. Oh, I admit, like I should probably get off social media because it, you know, or things like TikTok and Instagram because it creates insecurity for you because you see the stuff out there. If you're not on it, you don't see it.
Yeah, but Josh, real quick, and then Eric, I want to get your view. Is that but something you said also to go back to what we were talking about in the last episode is also, you know, talking about that objectifying people, turning our lives into commodities, and said that might actually be the result of the lack of developing a good coherent sense of identity or self, you know, sort of a sense of who I am. And I can't think of the authors, but I was reading some criticisms of the self-esteem literature in psychology that especially kind of ran rampant through the 80s and 90s, and said that self-esteem was a horrible construct to promote, because all of a sudden what it says is you have to just constantly feel good about yourself and think that you're great, and that's not life. And so in fact, they said that one of the better ways to look at it would be almost more a sense of self-compassion, which realizes that as complete people, as complete individuals, is that we're going to have the things that we're great at, and we're going to have the things that are the areas that we're not so proud of, that we're, you know, but we know that they're still part of us and that that's okay. And that last part, I think, is the part that I've gotten increasingly better at, admittedly not always perfect, because nobody is, but is that sense of, is that I know that there is no master list. There is no chart that says for me to be an accepted person or an accepted male, I have to have A, B, C, and D. Is that I'm able to increasingly recognize who I am, my strengths, my talents, my limitations, my areas where I need to grow. And I'm okay with that. Is that I don't see that as bad. I don't see that as somehow to be rejected. And so increasingly, I think through both martial arts, but also through academia, but then also through some kind of contemplative practices, is that now I've gotten better. Like if people want to go, "Oh, you don't know what you're doing," I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a fucking idiot." You know, it's like, well, look at him. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Guess what? I'm going to fall down like a 50-year-old man. You know, it's like I, you know, like anymore when people would go to kind of shoot arrows at me, there's no place for the arrows to stick, because, you know, what they're trying to do is to elicit a certain reaction, or they're trying to bring you down a notch. And my sense of me is bigger than that. And I'm not talking about in an egotistical way, but even though I think both things are true, I'm not saying that we shouldn't ever care about how others see us or think about us, because I do think it's healthy for us to have some sense of priority for how other people see us and think of us, but we can't live our life that way. And I think that the more that as people, if we can come to a place where we sort of get a better sense of who we are, you know, good, bad, and ugly, you know, all that together, is that it creates more of a sense of stable identity, and people aren't able to push you off balance as much, if that makes any sense. But I mean, but Eric, what do you think?
Well, I'm with you on the, there's not really a checklist. We kind of make up our own standards of measurement. What do we measure ourselves against? And like I said, it's kind of a situational thing. You're talking about people, poking fun and firing arrows at you. I think if we understand that every action, everything that people do and say has a desired result. So if if we try to, without projecting, if we try to understand that desired result, I think it might be easier to cope with when somebody's, making fun of you or giving you a hard time, or, instead of the default of feeling inadequate being, just rolling with it, getting out on the dance floor like you talked about, and, doing your own dance there. But, it's, yeah, I think people need to find things that they're good at, and celebrate those things, and work on the things that they're not so great at. Like my brother's a very talented musician. He plays 22 different instruments. Like I play the radio. That's it. Like I have no musical talent. But like I can pick up stations you never heard before. Like
Hey, you're better than me. I can't even always tune the radio successfully.
So, I mean, he tried to show me, how to play guitar when I was younger, but like I'm extremely left-handed. So like he'd show me a chord and then hand me the guitar and I'd flip it around, and it just didn't compute. So yeah, I'd love to. I don't feel inadequate in that arena, because not everybody's, a musician. I wish that was something I was better at, but
No, and Eric J is a good example, because people like that. I also think that over time, now that I've given myself more permission to not have to be this extreme best or top, whatever, is that I can look at other people's skill sets, even if I don't have them, and appreciate them, but I'm able to appreciate them without seeing them as threats. And I think sometimes as guys, that might end up being some of our cognitive default, which is, oh, this person is better at me in X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. And so that's a threat. I have to sort of like make that not be the case. And I've gotten better at looking at people that are incredibly talented in certain areas. Instead of going, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough, I don't live up, I go, wow, cool, show me what you do. So just like with Jay, I was like, wow, cool, I don't have this talent, but I appreciate that you do. Show me your skills. So, and I think that over time that's become a little bit better for me as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to do that. I feel like that's hard for a lot of people to do, because I think I'm not sure why, but people's successes make others feel inadequate, right? Especially when we're talking about this idea of masculinity or being a man or whatever, these insecurities that we have, because we see it in money. It's like, okay, well, this person has a lot of money. It's like, they're an asshole. Like we always have to find the but, right? We can't just celebrate their success. We can't celebrate, who they are. We almost like have to put it in a sandwich of some kind to be like, oh yeah, they do this really thing, but they're, really bad at this other thing. Like to make sure there's this, I guess we're going back to this pecking order, right? To make sure there's this a scale of who you are as a man, something like that.
Yeah. I'm gonna fire a shot across Josh's starboard bow, especially against this whole culture thing as opposed to evolutionary drives, is that, it'd almost be like that we go back to this default of there is this innate drive towards competition for resources and status. So it's hard for us as people, especially as guys, to let go of that, because built into some of our wiring is this jockeying for trying to have more resources than others and having higher status as others. And then that drive just happens to play out in thousands of different varieties through different cultural context. And I'm going to leave it there.
Oh, you're just going to do that? You're just going to throw that out there? And be like, oh, look at this biological drive that we have that's hidden in these cultural aspects. Fuck you, John.
Well, I think that there is some biological drive to it. I mean, if we didn't have any kind of feelings of inadequacy, I think we'd get more complacent and like be more accepting. You know, if we had more of a concept of enough, you know, we wouldn't be people that store food. You know, like we wouldn't be, you know, trying to look ahead and you know, get ahead of our resources. You know, it's good enough. You know, like, but I think that somewhere in that wiring, you know, feeling like the absence of enough is a motivating factor. At least that's how I try to turn my feelings of not being enough. You know, I try to, you know, break that down into its components and find out what it's made of, you know, and then find out how I can make it work for me, you know. But
And Eric, I think you're right. And so here again, not to make sort of a very sincere, point, especially, to any, not only guys out there listening, but also just anybody listening, because we all deal with these, insecurities, is that, there's this wonderful sense that if we can recognize those tendencies, like those energies, and if we're able to recognize them, that means that we don't necessarily have to act them out. We can do something different. And if we let go of some of that, like you said, some of that grasping, some of that over identification with these tendencies, there's a quote, the author escapes me, but I have this up in my office at work. And the quote is, "I crave companions, not competitors." And so I think that over time, when you start to let go of some of that jockeying and competition, you start to want to look for people that help you to feel as though you're enough, that you don't have to crave to have more or be something different. It's like, hey, these people are going to make you feel accepted and loved and valued just the way you are. You're enough. And so to me, that's gotten a little bit better over the past several years. So just for example, as a martial art context, I don't know what Josh's view on this would be, but now anymore, if I'm looking to train with someone or in a particular approach, is that I'm much more concerned about who that person is, how they're going to interact with me, that relationship, and is that relationship and this training going to help me to be a better person? I don't care if you're the most dangerous person on the planet. If you're an asshole and if you don't treat me well and if you don't make my life better, I don't have time for you. I don't want to be the ultimate warrior. I want to be a better John. And if you're going to help me with that, cool. If not, I don't have time for these games anymore. So I actually, even in like martial art training, tend to seek out people that are good people to have a relationship with, who are just going to make me a better person, not just a better physical martial artist. And so I see that as because I want to find those relationships that are going to help me to find companions, not competitors, people that are going to make me a better me. They're going to help me to realize that I'm enough.
you mentioned the fighters. I got to meet Hoist Gracie. He was kind of a dick. You know, I wasn't expecting that. You know, we were backstage, and he was taking pictures with some fans. You know, and this kid came up to him and was like, "Hey, pretend to put me in a chokehold," and like he snatched him up so quick and like actually had pressure on him. And I'm like, "What?" I mean, yeah, it's an authentic picture. Like the kid's about to pass out, but what are you proving? You know, like he's not attacking you. He can't. You know, I don't know. It just seemed like kind of a dick thing to do, but
Yeah, I've always said that. I mean, I'm gonna use my size privilege here. I've always said that, like, if you have these certain skills, these ideas of masculine skills, whatever they are, and someone seeks you out for them, like you don't like that should be your moment to be compassionate, to be a good companion. I joke and talk about like, you ever run into like really big dudes that are tall and muscular, and handsome or whatever, and they're assholes. I'm like, dude, what do you have to be an asshole about? Like, you're like 6'6", 280 pounds, like, and you're in good shape. Like, you have no
You
natural predators.
you know what he's actually angry about,
What, not being able to find pants?
or the guy in the canoe.
Oh, right. You can't find the guy in the canoe. I understand. It's hard. It's difficult. Um, no, I wanted to shift gears. Actually, I had this thought, and I wanted to shift gears. We're talking about insecurity, and I like, me. I like to kind of dwell in these like higher social thoughts. Do you think there's an increased sense of insecurity to be a man today? Like we've been talking a lot about what being enough of a man, or these things like that. This idea of insecurity being housed in being a man. What about in today's society? Like, do you see this kind of growing insecurities around like expectations of being a man, or just like it's hard to be a man in society these days, or to like think about having those skills in society?
I think that's something that's hard to gauge. I think as you get older and as you mature and as you start looking at insecurities differently, like I said, I was swimming in them, drowning in them when I was younger. But as I've gotten older and kind of made different things different priorities, um, I don't think that I've really looked for it so much now, because I don't measure myself the way that I used to. And yeah, I don't know how to explain what my train of
I,
thought got derailed.
yeah, I have a thought that comes up, and like you said, Josh, do we think it's sort of harder today to maybe be that way, or to identify with that because of my general waters I swim in, like you, with social science, with behavioral science, things like that, like we were talking about in the past. And I might not be coining this term. And so if somebody else has used it, I can't think of their names. I'm not really taking credit for it, but something that comes to me, something that has been concerning to me, is I think it's harder to maybe to be able to identify and to celebrate as a quote unquote man, because there has been an increased effort over the past few decades to problematize that. And we keep hearing this term over and over, toxic masculinity. Now, if we still position this for a moment, obviously there are aspects of some of those male tendencies that can come out being very toxic and unproductive. So I'm not defending some deplorable behaviors that guys engage in. So there are aspects maybe of some of those that are there, but I think the problem.
Can you be specific on that? Because I think it's
Well,
important to
maybe, yeah, but like maybe this sort of tendency, this again, this is a societal script that I think is complete and utter bullshit, but almost this script of that I'm the one who is and should be dominant because I'm the man, and people, especially my partner, should be subservient to me. And if people aren't, then I can physically try to control them through aggression, some of this stuff. I think that some of these tendencies are ones that we have to look at and go, yeah, maybe we should let go of some of that. But I think that what's happened is that this term toxic masculinity sounds so easy to say that really what we've begun to kind of think about is not toxic masculinity, but the fact that masculinity is toxic. And I think that is a very dangerous perspective. And what I would like to see is, yes, let's talk about the aspects of masculine identity that can come across as toxic, but let's also talk about heroic masculinity. Let's talk about some of those characteristics that we should try to celebrate and build on. Because if all we do is to say that masculinity is a toxic, oppressive, violent force, there's no way back, and there's no way to identify that in a healthy way. So I think what that creates is it kind of sends things to an extreme. So either you have young men who find it very hard to kind of figure that out or to identify that way because it seems so problematic and threatening, or you have the complete opposite end where you get sort of like, Homo neanderthalis, if we want to be just kind of stereotypical, you get sort of like the complete stereotypic, oh my gosh, maybe you shouldn't be that much of a guy, type deal. So I think that it's pushing it towards two extremes. But you're the sociologist. What do you think?
Yeah, I always bristle at that term toxic masculinity. You're right. I think there are a lot of positive masculine behaviors out there. I think it is. I don't think it's. I don't know. I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence of whether or not this idea that men feel insecure these days on how to be a man, or that they can't be men. Because you're right. I think there's the behaviors out there that men engage in that are like, they're not good behaviors. Things like catcalling. No, just fucking keep your mouth shut. You can look, don't stare. Like, just fucking knowledge in your brain to be like, that's an attractive woman. All right, you did it in your head. You don't have to fucking spout it out, like shit like that, where it's like this overt, like you got to prove something to somebody, or you're way too loud about it. Like, you don't need that. But I agree that there are some people who take it a step too far, that masculinity is toxic, which I don't agree with. I think there's a lot of positives that come out of masculinity, that I think men these days are trying to figure out what that is, and they're not quite sure where that's at. They're not sure where the barriers are. They're not sure where the parameters are anymore. And I definitely think it's a struggle for some, especially young men, when they're trying to figure out how to be men. And then, well, we can't be men anymore. What the hell does that mean? What do you mean you can't be men anymore? Yes, you can. You can still do these things. If society is ridiculing you for doing, masculine things, like, that's on them. But, if they're coming after you for like catcalling or being too aggressive or being, an asshole and calling it, I'm an alpha male. Yeah, that's crap. Like, that's not good behavior. But, if you're supportive, or you're the breadwinner, that's all right. If you fuck chop wood, and you like having big muscles, that's all right. Like, things like that, like, they're about you. But when you start projecting that on other people, that's just crap. Like, don't do that. So I definitely think there's some mixed messages out there, for sure, that maybe are a little bit harder to wade through for younger generations. And maybe some older generations haven't quite figured out how to, not do that. I feel like we're kind of Gen Zers or Gen Xers. So we have this whole indifference thing. So we know how to do that already in a lot of ways. We're just like, I'm just not going to talk to you. It's fine. But I can definitely see how now, because of all of this kind of gender insecurity, creates this sense of other types of insecurity of why gender is this weird thing right now.
That's a good. No, I'm serious. And I'm being serious. I'm being sincere. That's a great comment. Gender is just this weird thing right now. I mean, it really is. And so I do think that with those dynamics, it does make it harder sometimes for all people, but including guys. I mean, women have their own experience of this, but to kind of figure out, well, what does this mean? And how should I be? That, and again, these are just kind of fundamental existential questions of what type of a human being do I want to be? And obviously gender is a component of that, but it's not the entire story. So it informs it, but it doesn't define it. And so the big questions become, what do I want to be about? How do I want to treat people? What type of people do I want in my life? And I think that because sometimes people are so insecure in some of these identities, gender being one of them. And admittedly, again, that's an observation, not a complete criticism, because we live in a time where it's hard to be comfortable with some of these. But I think because people are so confused about these identities, it makes them over-identified with them. And deep down below those, it's not saying those don't matter at all, but we're almost saying that in addition to those, beyond those, what kind of person do I want to be? What do I want my life to be about? What's important for me? What do I want in my life, either materially or relationships? And obviously, things like gender are going to be a contributing factor to some of those decisions, but they're not the complete story. And to me, it kind of goes back to that. Let me be quiet. It goes back to that difficulty that people seem to be having with coming up with a sense of identity, like a sense of self, kind of a sense of, this is sort of who I am, this is what I'm about, and I'm okay with that. I can embrace that, because it's hard to have the idea of who I am when I'm so threatened by gender and all these other, topics. It makes it to where it's hard to know where I exist in the midst of all of those intersectional hierarchies.
Yeah, I think I'll just to jump in there real fast. Like, we talked about the differences in what people look for compared to what people used to look for. And people used to look for that sense of purpose or personal philosophy. Now it's finance, now it's money. And I think if we're speaking about identity, that's essentially what's been the root of the foundation of your identity. Rather than coming up with who you are, who you're going to be, philosophically speaking, right? This idea of yourself, we look to money and consumption on how we're going to express who we are. That's more important. In my sociology class, I actually have this discussion question where I'm like, all right, so let's talk about gender and the gender thing. Particularly, it's like, all right, if we woke up tomorrow, we didn't wear clothes, we didn't do our hair, we didn't do makeup, and we didn't buy frivolous, like, consumable products, how would you express your gender identity? But you can even take it a step further, is how would you express your identity, period, if you didn't consume things, if you didn't dress a particular way? If we were a naked society, or would you express yourself? And I think in the way our society is structured now, that's a really complicated question. But if you are a society that's bound in who you are philosophically, you can answer that question a little bit easier. And I think now we're having this struggle of identities, and insecurity of identity, because it's so wrapped and consumed. The things we buy to express who we are, as opposed to be who you are, and everything else, this is secondary.
Well, to go back to the toxic masculinity thing, I agree. You both had mentioned it. I have read all kinds of things where people use that term, and they do seem to use it in a way that makes masculinity sound toxic in general. And I think that's absurd, but that's a terrible terrible line to be walking on. To go back to the catcalling, I think that's a thing of lack of intelligence, maybe lack of maturity. Um, that's something you would do if you're drunk, And if you're drunk, it's because you've lowered your intelligence. You've chemically lowered your intelligence, so you've got this false sense of confidence, like, hey, if I yell at this girl and get her attention, things seem like a better idea when you're stupid. So
at least that's all theoretical and academic, because none of us have ever been drunk and behaved in a less intelligent way. So
absolutely.
I think you're just kind of like knowing that from either reading or hearing other people's accounts, right?
So yeah, if everything, lower intelligence, like I said, everything sounds like a better idea. Like hold my beer, like watch this, that always comes from a lower intelligence being. So yeah, somebody that's catcalling, um, you could call that toxic masculinity. I call it ignorance. Like it's not something that a mature adult would do. If you have the intellect or the capacity to go talk to someone without yelling at them, I think I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish there was a better way to express, and maybe we need to do this list of like, all right, what are toxic behaviors that men engage in? Where do we draw that line? Like people, I always like to talk about the wage gap, and one of the arguments of the wage gap is men take dangerous jobs. It's like, okay, well, is that a sign of toxic masculinity, or is the social push to be a provider that pushes men into those dangerous jobs, or is there some pride in doing those dangerous jobs? Like, and is it okay to take those dangerous jobs? Like, I don't see a problem with that. Like, some people would. It's like, all right, well, who's going to do the jobs? They got to get done. Or are you saying that we just throw those dangerous jobs out? I don't think we can do that. Like, so, you know, like I always make the analysis, that when we're talking about things like the wage gap, I always say it's an earn gap, but when we talk about men engaging in these behaviors, we never talk about like, all right, well, should we relieve men of the burden to have to engage in these jobs? Like, or are we just going to throw our hands up and say, nah, fuck it, they can do it? Because, like, what is it? Like 98, 99% of bricklayers are men. Not that that's a dangerous job, but that's a hard fucking job. I've carried hod before. My dad was a construction guy. Like, it's a hard job. So, and it breaks your body. Your body's broken after, 40 years of doing that. So, are we to say that men shouldn't do that job? Or are we going to do an analysis to make that job easier for me? Or we just say, fuck it? I don't know.
No, I was a hod carrier once too. I remember that week. It was it was intense. There's no way I could do it for 40 years. So I think the solution is just make things out of other material. Quit using brick.
It's almost as if there was maybe some type of an evolutionary pressure on men to tend to be the ones that take
God
on
damn it, John.
that take on danger and risk because of their connection to survival and success through providing and protecting. Again, I think that's one of the things that that we can celebrate is that there's always going to be some of these activities that carry with them a certain amount of danger, risk, and battering, on the body. And whoever does those is that we just need to get better at sort of acknowledging the impact that they have, and historically, for probably a lot of understandable reasons, a lot of those roles have gone to men. It doesn't necessarily mean that men are the only ones, that could do those or adopt those roles. But I think that we just have to kind of honor some of those roles. I mean, in fact, not to go off on a tangent, but and especially, being a guy who works in a very interpersonal and cerebral profession of both psychotherapy and academic teaching, is that what I always say that there's a lot less risk in my work than like my brother who might be operating a crane in the midst of a chemical spill. So I think that because of the fact that that increasingly, like there's some academics such as Steven Pinker and others who kind of talk about, like, whenever people go, oh my God, the world is the most dangerous it's ever been. And they go, bullshit. If you look at the data, this is the safest time to ever have lived. And I think that now, more than times in the past, many of us, including guys, are able to have jobs that offer less of a physical risk, that it becomes easy to get separated from that, detached from that, and then we lose appreciation. It's almost like when they talk about, that we don't take our food, we take our food for granted because we don't appreciate all that goes into raising it, producing it. And that's a very accurate statement to make, is that it's almost like we tend to lose sight of some of these important activities, these important jobs that carry with them a risk of danger, because many of us, more than any time in human history, have the ability to do jobs that carry with them less risk than earlier times in history.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned your brother in the crane. I would like to give your brother a shout out, because Adam he followed his dreams, and he's one of the few people that, like, when we were kids, he'd be in the backyard playing in the dirt. He'd be in a metal Tonka truck, and he's like, this is what makes me happy. This is what I'm going to do. And he's an earth mover to this day. Like, he followed his passion, and that's what he does, is he does what he loves. And I think that's great.
It is. And that's my shout out, is that, again, it goes back to that. I'm incredibly proud of him and his accomplishments and the skills and capabilities he has. And again, I think that's important for us as human beings and as guys to be able to do that. Instead of trying to cut each other down, let's celebrate, each other's accomplishments. I mean, he's just this phenomenal guy. And so, I mean, I'm lucky to have him as a brother. So I agree with you, Eric. And you got to be careful what you play as kids, because actually as a child, I played school and he played Tonka trucks on a dirt pile. And now he's an operating engineer and I teach at a university. So I guess you got to be careful what you play as a child, because it might actually come true.
All right, I got a final thought for you, and we'll wrap this up. So, have you heard the phrase, the quote or the saying or whatever, that rough times create strong men, right? Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create bad times. Have you heard that phrase?
I have, yeah.
Where are we at now in that equation? What are your thoughts?
Individually or as a society? Or
As a society, where are we at? Like, say, American society, where are we at in that like analogy?
I think we've become comfortable and soft. So I would say we're on the weak men part of the cycle there.
You think, are we in good times or are we in weak men?
I think, I don't know, that one's hard to answer as far as a society, but yeah, I do see a lot of weak men out there.
I know, but are they weak, or are they just, like we're saying, better at different things?
Yeah, I was just trying to make a joke because we're talking about insecurity and
because
so you're causing insecurity.
Because we have to make fun of all of the girly men. That's right, all of those weak, sort of, guys. Hey, listen, I can't make fun of them because I basically, one of my testicles has rescinded up into my stomach and become an ovary. I'm kind of a nice balance between masculine and feminine. But
I wouldn't say that, John. People probably believe that. Like, really? Is it ovary now?
They might. So I'll leave that for them to ponder and explore further. But no, when you say that, Josh, the first thing that comes to me, so the chances of him ever hearing this are like 14 billion to 1. But if I want to acknowledge one of the people that really in the past couple of years has influenced some of my thinking on topics, is that there is a a public intellectual, a social commentator that I incredibly value, that I think is brilliant and makes very poignant points, is a gentleman named Douglas Murray, and he's out of Britain. And so, even though that's not exactly what he means by this, is that he says that when the invading barbarians are at the gates, we're going to be arguing about what gender they are. And so I do think that, unfortunately, because of our prosperity, and again, we shouldn't throw that away. I mean, and we should be so grateful for that. I do think that because of our prosperity, we have lost some sight on how challenging and dangerous all this can be, and especially in life. And so I think that, I don't want to use the term soft, but I think that it has made us less ready to respond to literal physical dangers and threats. So I do think that in that way, it has made us soft. Is that I think that as a society in general, but including us as men, is that because we have lived in relative comfort and safety for so long compared to our ancestors, I do think that we're at one of those places where the good times have made, quote unquote, soft men.
You think we're at the soft men
Yeah.
phase? I feel like sometimes we're in the hard phase. Like we've had soft men, and now men, whatever you want to call it, and now we're in a hard phase. Particularly around this idea, and I get to throw another idea out right at the end here. I posted this once in the middle of quarantine. We're in this moment of what I call anomie, or actually not what I call, what sociologists and earlier people call anomie, right? This feeling of normlessness. And it creates great anxiety. You see this throughout time, is whenever we have no bearing. We have this insecurity, going back, right? This idea of insecurity and anxiety, social anxiety about what are we doing? What is expected of me? And no one knows which direction we're going, and it feels like no one's at the helm of the ship. So there's no norms, no one knows what we're supposed to be doing. But on the flip side of that, we have all these people out there that if you step out of line, like just piranha you, right? Like you've been passing a pool of piranhas and they just start attacking you. So it's weird to. I feel like we're almost at like the hard times on a cultural level. We're in the hard times, and I feel like hopefully out of this we'll maybe have some resolve, have some steel-minded people that kind of come out of this in whatever it looks like, to help us as a society kind of move forward. Because right now we're all over the place.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what's creating this idea of insecurity overall.
For those of you playing the home game, Josh is referring to a concept that was coined by the French sociologist Emile Durkheim, anomie, which occurred in the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s, early 1900s. But Josh, that's a great point. And so maybe, as we're trying to wrap this up, and so maybe this is, again, building off that, and kind of what I would hope for myself, because again, I'm not perfect at this stuff. I struggle with it sometimes day in, day out as well. But is like you said, to kind of, to go off of that, is that to maybe get to a place, like you said, where we do need to harden up a bit while still maintaining some flexibility to be open to feedback and be able to change. So for example, as a guy, I want to be able to take in feedback and to be able to hear it and go, okay, I believe that's accurate. Let me try to use that to change or adapt my sense of self. But we also have to get better, I believe, like you said, at getting to a point that when people come in and swarm and attack, and and not just physically, but we're talking about socially and social media wise and all that, I think we all have to get kind of better at a place where we kind of look at all of that and go, like you said earlier, yeah, fuck you. I mean, like, just because you're going to bring those criticisms or say it doesn't mean I have to buy it. It doesn't mean I have to believe it and to believe that that's accurate about me. You know what? So there's, to a certain degree, we have to be able to protect ourselves against some criticism without kind of giving into it, while still having some room to be able to take in some criticism that's constructive and change from it. And so I think out of that, one thing that I would hope for me and for others, and hopefully people listen that might take from here, is really to kind of come away from this with a reminder that even though, like Eric said, sometimes we've dealt with some of these insecurities for a long time, and those can come from early experiences like our family or early experiences with friends or school, and all these scripts have been going on forever that tells us who we are or how we're not good enough, is to really sort of like to be able to reconnect with the sense that every person has a sense of worth and dignity. And each one of us is going to have things that we do well and also things that we can continue to work with. And that's okay. One doesn't cancel out the other. So my hope for me and for everybody is that we continue to try to come to a greater, more expanded, more accepting reality for what it means to be able to see me. And part of that, like I talked about tonight, is gender. But even beyond that is just, let me come to a bigger, a grander picture of what it means to be me. And to know that that doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to follow a checklist. It doesn't have to fulfill certain things. The most important thing is for me to come to a sense of me, and that sense of me to allow me to then to look at how do I use me and my talents to connect with and serve others, to find those relationships that are going to nurture me as opposed to relationships that are going to tear me down. That's my 2 cents.
Final thoughts, Eric?
Well, I had read something the other day. It had a kind of a hint on insecurity. It was a story from an older man, and they were talking about coffee. And I guess the mine, he was like a coal miner or something, and the mine that he worked at, some of the guys would have milk and sugar in their coffee, and they were, poking at him, giving him a hard time because he didn't have, the extra milk and sugar to put in his coffee, because that it was kind of a finance thing, like they were poking fun at him for being poor, and he turned it around by, basically calling them girls. He's like, well, I don't need to girly up my coffee. A real man drinks it black. And that it was just just kind of, they fired arrows at him, and he found a way to catch him and toss him back. And I thought that was kind of neat. I don't know if that's neat for a final thought, but that was just something that I was thinking about when you threw it to me there. But
Sure.
yeah, I'm with John. I think learning how to establish who you are. Yeah, not with a checklist. I think if you if you find ways that you feel inadequate, maybe write those down and work on that sort of thing. Josh, like you said, you're not good at grilling. Um, Up until a year ago, I could count on one hand how many times I grilled. Like, I wasn't good at it either. Fucking hated it. And now we've got, my wife's like, we got this new grill, and she's like, you should go grill something, or go grill some burgers. And I'm like, yeah, all right. So I had to learn to get better at it, because I got a George Foreman that I can't screw up. Like that's why I'm like, this is my kind of grilling. This is easy. Like it's not gonna fall in the slots between the grates, and it cooks it evenly, and it's kind of like cheating at grilling, but I prefer the George Foreman. But yeah, I'm getting better at grilling because it's something that I've had to put a focus on. long story long there. So yeah, like some things that, people find themselves inadequate at, like I try to make that a focus. If doing this is going to produce this kind of feeling, what can I do to make this activity feel positive to me? So then that way, as I go throughout my day, whatever I'm encountering isn't going to be a negative thing. It's going to be more of a learning experience more than a insecurity type deal.
Yeah. I would add that, as you develop who you are, right, the sense of who you're going to be, which I think is important, having that personal philosophy, is this notion of adaptability, which I haven't really addressed. And I think that's the key here. If we're talking about toxic masculine behavior, I think a lack of an adaptability is one of them. So being able to adapt to new situations, to be able to learn. And I think that's also what's created this sense of anomie, is our inability to adapt. And I, and to overcome, but particularly to adapt, gonna also quote an old sociologist as well, Herbert Spencer, who actually was the one who coined the term survival of the fittest in relationship to cultures and adaptability. And arguably, that's what Darwin was getting at too. It's survival of the fittest is not the strongest, it's not the smartest, it's the one who can adapt the fastest. And I think that's one thing that we forget, is that when we're talking about masculinity, we're talking about this idea of insecurity, like if you have that sense to be able to adapt to your situation, to learn new things, as you're suggesting, to take in that criticism and move forward, that's going to help you be the fittest you can be in the long run. Yeah. I don't know. Or, maybe I'm just overthinking it. Who knows?
Well, that's what we do.
That's what we do. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining me tonight, and hopefully we'll throw this up and people will like it. Thanks for those who are tuning in. Hopefully you listen to the whole thing and don't think we're red pill assholes or something. We're incels or whatever. Red pills are those guys like men's rights activists. I don't feel like we're really that. We're more of like I said, overthinkers. So, but again, like and subscribe. Hit that like button down at the bottom and subscribe to whenever we post new videos and whatnot.
And Josh, can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
Just because, again, I mean, something that at least is a special and important part of this, for me, and Josh was mentioning before this, is that I have to just kind of say this real quick too, is that I love Josh's cup, and it just shows that, in all kind of circumstances, he just likes to have a little pussy up next to his face. So,
maybe it's important.
That's right. But no, is that so again, thanks for people that are watching, that are leaving comments and like even suggestions. Maybe continue to send us any ideas you have for topics you would like to see us talk about, kick around, make some jokes at. Some people have left. Josh was saying some good comments about maybe thinking of ways that technically we can try to change some of what we do, how this comes across. And so even if you don't see those play out in the next episode or 2 or 3, it's only because we're continuing to find ways to make this work for ourselves practically in our lives as we try to grow this. But so just because you might not see that change just yet, please know that we appreciate that feedback. So, whether it's topics, whether it's content, or whether it's process, engage with us, because we really value all of you out there joining us along on this great journey.
Yeah. And you can do that by commenting at the bottom on our YouTube videos, or email us at flyoverthinkers@gmail.com. And again, as we go forward, we will add more social media stuff to it. Hopefully a TikTok, maybe an Instagram here or there. Who knows? The sky's the limit. Thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate it. See you next time.